Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Could everyone please take their seats? We got a full program, and I want to be respectful of the commissioner's time in particular. So let's go ahead and sit down so we can get started. I want to welcome everybody to the 2024 Fall Halloween edition of the WIRES program. Hopefully not too much scary stuff in store for you. But thank you all for being here. I just wanted to do a brief welcome, a couple of announcements. This being our fall meeting, in keeping with the tradition of our normal cycle, we had our election for WIRES officers and board members. So just talk a little bit about the outcome of that. In terms of new board of directors, we are going to have Jody Moskowitz, who's finishing up her term as president, moving on to the board. And Carrie Powell, who's currently on the board, will be serving an additional term. As far as new officers, Amanda Rumsey from PPL is going to be moving up as our new president for 2025. Dave Burnham with Eversource is going to be the vice president for the organization. Devin McMacken is going to continue on in his role as treasurer for one more year. And I want to welcome Jamie Simler to the Officer Corps. She will be serving as our secretary. So congratulations to all of our new board members and the new officers. And with the election of the new officers, the unfortunate thing is somebody winds up leaving the board. And for this year, Tom Hesterman, who's with Sunflower Electric Co-op, will be completing his final term on the board. Tom served for 4 years on the board. Previously, prior to that, he had been our president, vice president, and I think you were secretary for like forever, right? So Tom's done a tremendous amount of service on behalf of WIRES. Want to recognize him for his service. And we have this really neat token of appreciation for all of your time on the board. So Tom, if you can come on up, I want to make sure you get recognized for that. Now, Tom said the only condition of his agreeing to do this is that he didn't have to say anything, so I'm not going to make him say anything, but congratulations, Tom.
Thank you, Larry.
There you go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over briefly to Jody Moskowitz. She has some opening remarks, and then we'll get started with our program. So Jody, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Larry. Wow, that is bright. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our WIRES fall meeting. We have a great morning planned for you all. In addition to hearing from FERC Commissioner David Rosner, we have two very important panels that are going to focus on some of the real-world challenges that we face in getting transmission actually built, specifically around supply chain challenges and then around siting and permitting, which I know from personal experience is very complicated and challenging. I think that a frank discussion of these challenges is really essential to inform policymakers and regulators about changes that we need to make sure that reliable, cost-effective transmission is actually placed into service. So looking forward to the discussion this morning. I'll just note this is my last meeting as WIRES president, so I wanted to take a minute to thank Larry, WIRES staff, my fellow officers, all the WIRES members for all their support over the last year. WIRES continues to be a very highly respected and credible voice of the transmission industry, and it's really been my honor and pleasure to serve as president this year. So with that, I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing, thank you. Thanks very much. It's my pleasure to introduce our honored guest, FERC Commissioner David Rosner. Commissioner Rosner joined FERC as a commissioner in June of this year. He has 15 years of experience on market design and energy policy issues, both inside and outside of government. Prior to his service as commissioner, he was an energy industry analyst for FERC and spent 2 years as a member of the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee Democratic staff. Commissioner Rosner was previously a senior policy advisor for the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis and an associate director at the Bipartisan Policy Center's Energy Project. He holds master's degrees in economics and public policy from American University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from Tufts University. And we very much look forward, WIRES very much looks forward to working with Commissioner Rosner over the next several years. And thank you again for joining. And I am now going to turn this over to Larry and the Commissioner to have a fireside chat. Thank you.
Welcome you into the WIRES living room area where we're going to have our fireside chat. First of all, thank you very much for coming over here to talk to WIRES. We're all really interested to hear. You're like a man of mystery in a lot of ways, a new commissioner at FERC. Everybody's interested to hear more about you, more about what your thinking is, about what the commission should be focused on, and what your priorities are. But I'd like to sort of back up a little bit and just start with some of the background and how Commissioner Rosner came to be, in a sense. So can you talk a little bit about your educational experience and the work that you had done leading up to the time when you came to work at FERC as a staffer?
Well, first of all, thank you, Larry and Jody and WIRES, for having me here. It's a huge honor to be in front of this group. Many of you I've spent a lot of time with in previous roles, and you all are incredibly generous, kind, and smart people, and that working together, I feel like we've been able to make a lot of progress on difficult electric sector issues. So thanks all. Yeah, so where did how did this all happen? I came to DC about 22 years ago and started working in energy. I had always been interested in energy. When I was, doing the educational part of my life, energy was not a major topic. There was sort of like you could go to Texas and talk about, rocks and oil, or you could go to a couple different places around the country, but it wasn't common. And so, I had long had this interest. And one day, I focused on applied economics and was interested in public policy. And one day I saw this job in the paper, and it said, Bipartisan Policy Center to be launched, hiring a policy analyst. And so it was in the Washington Post. This was back when you got the paper. Oh, wow. And so I emailed them and applied, and they had me in, and I just saw Jason Grumet was one of the people who interviewed me. He's now over at American Clean Power, and anyway, Jason was setting up this shop to do consensus-driven, bipartisan policy, and that was really appealing to me. I think, most of my career, I've been really convinced that consensus-driven decision-making is the way you get a really good, durable outcome, and you get decisions that have staying power and keep moving the country forward. And so for me, that's just been a really good fit ideologically, and also been able to work on a bunch of great issues. I mean, I started, it was after EPACT 05, we were working on follow up to that, and one day someone came in my office and said, hey, I want you to go work on this natural gas contracting project. People got burned a couple of years ago, and they're all spot now, and that doesn't make any sense either. And I said, well, I don't know anything about natural gas. And he said, no problem. And so I go and I start learning about natural gas and the contracts for it. And 2 weeks later, there's there's shale gas. And so that sort of launched me into this gas moment of life, and that brought me into working on gas electric issues. And so anyway, I spent a lot of time on that. The general frame at Bipartisan Policy Center was, hey, let's get former electeds, people with skin in the game together to try and agree on hard issues. From there, I moved over to DOE, working under Secretary Moniz and Melanie Kenderdine, and again, it's funny because they hired me because they said, hey, we need someone who knows about the gas pipeline system. So they hired me for gas, and then they put me in a team that was doing climate, not working on gas. And we talked a lot about electric, all the issues that you're talking about today, essentially, but not in that level of detail. In the DOE dashed line to FERC dangerous kind of level of knowledge and sophistication. But it was a wonderful experience. We published 2 giant reports, one of which I feel like might have been released in this room, that still I see when I was working on the Hill, you still see pieces of those reports. I'm thinking transformers popping up as what do we do about transformers? How do we get a better domestic supply? After DOE, moved over to FERC, which once again, they hired me, Arnie Quinn and Jignasa Gadani hired me in the policy office because they wanted someone to work on natural gas because they thought incoming Chairman McIntyre would be really interested in doing more on natural gas electric coordination. So I spent a year writing a memo, here's all the options, and then they realized he wasn't interested. And so from there, they said, well, go work with this person who wrote Order 1000, and she's going to train you. And so I started working on that. I worked a bit on the storage rulemaking, and then for Chairman Glick, I worked on a number of different market design issues, capacity markets, some of the new sort of valuation techniques like ELCC. I worked on those with Robert Ferris, who's in the back there, who's the Commission's expert on that, and now generously is helping me. And from there, one day, I got a call from Chairman Glick's Chief of Staff, and she said, hey, Chairman Manchin is looking for someone who knows a lot about transmission. And I had 2 reactions. One was yes, and the other one was, what does Joe Manchin want to do with transmission? I've never heard the guy talk about it. But either way, I was interested. I went for it, and showed up in the office. They said, great, here's your desk in the corner of the basement. If you ever talk to anybody, we'll send you back. And yeah, some of you in this room, we had a number of awkward, impossible conversations. I'm sorry, those were the rules. But they were like, hey, Build Back Better, it's on that computer over there. And hey, how would you fix transmission? And we're thinking about ITCs and everything else under the sun. And let's get some ideas on the page. And so that was a wonderful experience that one day led to this role.
Well, great. Well, you've kind of like lived the dream of a lot of FERC staffers of working on staff and then finally getting up there so you could straighten things out that you had to deal with when you were on staff. So congratulations on making a move. Can you talk a little bit about the process of transitioning onto the commission? You mentioned some of your staff. You could talk a little bit about the hiring process on that, and just getting up to speed on so much stuff happening at FERC.
Yeah, well, first of all, so I got confirmed, I think, on June 13th. Maybe it was the 12th. It's a little hazy. I go to my desk in the Senate, and they say, hey, you got to go do your new job now. So take my box over to FERC, and Chairman Phillips comes by. He said, hey, this is so great. Congratulations. You've realized this dream of everyone on the staff, and And he says, hey, by the way, you have 12 days. You're the quorum, and you used to work here, so you got this. And so was a very quick turnaround, but I was very lucky to be able to convince some people from FERC to come help me out. 2 of them in this room. I mentioned Robert Ferris, Alex Atabawada, who is working for Commissioner Clements, also has come over to help me on reliability and all other issues with running an office. And so you get 5 people. My general feeling was, hey, let's find people who, roughly know certain regions of the country. Let's, find people who are smart, who are not ideological, who want to get to the right answer, and who, first and foremost, are nice and who want to collaborate with everybody else in the building. And over the summer, I worked with Chairman Phillips and Commissioner Christie. It was a great experience. They're both wonderful people. I've also, as Commissioner Chang and C got up to speed, I've been working with them now for a few months. They're wonderful. They've built teams who I think we all are working really well together. And you can see some of that in the Commission's orders over the past 2 months or so, where we've had 2 meetings where they started mostly on time, and and also we had more or less unanimous orders with maybe a statement here or there, but concurrences, not dissents, and part of that is the previous commission. They did a lot of heavy lifting. They cleared the decks for us, but also I'm just incredibly optimistic that we have a slate of commissioners who are working really well together, who want to find consensus when we can. We know we probably won't always, but just being willing to try and spending the time together to try is just incredibly important. And I think the other thing that this is a big holiday in my house. I hear there's something happening on Tuesday. I have no idea how any of that will change anything, but for me, I'm just going to be doing the same thing, which is working through the issues, trying to find the right answer, listening to stakeholder input, especially your comments from groups like this, and just doing the good work that the commission is, I think, really well equipped to do.
Okay, good. Well, all right, enough with the soft stuff. Time to start moving.
No, I thought we said softballs only.
Time to start moving into some other areas. And I just want to mention to everybody, we'll be talking for a little while, but then we want to open it up to questions from the audience as well. So while I buy a little time by asking a few questions now, start thinking about what you'd like to ask the commissioner. This is a great opportunity to find out more about what he's thinking about. So. Yeah. But let me just start. So this is a pretty broad one, which is, you're on the commission now. What do you see as your priorities during your time on the commission? What do you want to focus on?
Yeah, couple things. I mean, first and foremost, I think reliability is just incredibly important in everything we do. That's intertwined with affordability. And I think today, when I think about reliability, I really think about change management. There's a lot of forces that are driving tremendous change in this sector. Those are huge challenges. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of consensus building to plot a path forward. But I'm 100% all in to try and do that. I also am just, when I think about all the transition, all the new demand, I just think this is just a really good story for the country. I think fundamentally load growth is economic growth, and we got to find ways to meet that need. It's easy to say that, hard to do it, but I think balancing reliability, affordability as we approach all these challenges, that's sort of my starting point. Second priority is, I would just call it change management or managing the transition, which is just being smart and plotting a course that just makes sense and we can explain. The commission over the past years has gone in a lot of different directions at times, and I think we've seen that what's good for ratepayers also usually aligns with what's good for the people who are serving them, and that's good because if we're introducing a lot of uncertainty, that's raising cost. If we're sending investment signals in places where it doesn't make sense to build, that's not good either. And so I'm a huge believer in some of the reforms that the commission has introduced on the market side. Things I mentioned, ELCC, that makes a lot of sense. That's really complicated, and there's lots of things to disagree about. But if you take a couple steps back, I think the broad direction of reforms like that are, hey, let's send incentives to build the right types of resources with the right attributes in the right places, and let's maintain the commission's longstanding fuel-neutral policy, which has served it really well. And it served consumers well because we unlock the resources that have the least cost and meet the need. And so I'm always excited to geek out on market design pieces, but I would also say that, while that's academically interesting, the purpose of markets is to deliver value to consumers, and so that is always a top of mind. Also, I recognize that the country is diverse, and there are lots of different ways to sort of figure this out. And I think we had a really good conversation maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago at our Reliability Technical Conference, where we heard about how, whether it be an IRP-based region or a hybrid or a region with a capacity market, that these techniques, these probabilistic techniques to sort of like figure what resources can deliver during these stress periods, people are all sort of thinking about it in a similar way, and I just think that that's really positive and good. Next priority for me, infrastructure, and from my perspective, that means not just the Commission's responsibility to cite natural gas infrastructure, but also, I think, planning, transmission planning, and also the limited role on backstop siting. On infrastructure, one of the things that I worked on over the summer was trying to vote out some of the certificate orders, not on the meeting, just whenever they were ready. We did that, and I think we spent a lot of time thinking about what the statute means and what our statutory obligations are there, and I'm committed to keep doing that and to listening to all perspectives in the record and try and get to answers that are legally durable and consistent with the statute. On transmission, I think the most natural place is the Commission's role on planning, and I know many of you in this room are huge stakeholders there, and I've been spending a lot of time the past few months thinking through all the comments on 1920 and talking with my colleagues about, hey, it seems like there's a couple places where a lot of stakeholders agree on some perhaps modest reforms that are directionally consistent, which is we clearly have a need. I think lots of people, I'm pretty sure everyone in this room recognizes, hey, there's a need to build transmission. And in some places, it's a lot of need. And so starting from there, I've been having good conversations internally with folks to sort of look through, are there some things where we can find some agreement? I'm really hopeful that we can get 5 votes on a rehearing order, but I don't know, we'll see what happens. I mean, all I can really guarantee is 1 vote. But I'm committed to work through that, and I'm 100% all in on voting for something that I believe is directionally consistent with where that needs to go, and that makes smart choices that we can explain to you. And I'm excited to do that once we get there. So yeah, that's kind of the quick tour on the priority side.
Well, you covered a lot of territory there, so
everything is important.
Well, let me circle back to the first topic you talked about, which was reliability, and then in conjunction with that, the phrase affordability, because I want to probe that a little bit more. In my mind, there's some level of almost natural tension between the two. A lot of commissioners are very fond of saying reliability is job one, right? So that's job one. Then you've got affordability on the other side of the equation, which is mentioned frequently by commissioners. I think everyone on the commission, I think, has mentioned it at some point. I'm curious about the concept of affordability. Obviously, that term is not in the statute. It's phrased more in terms of just and reasonable rates. So I'm curious, how do you see, or how would you define affordability in the context of transmission and meeting reliability needs? What are you looking at, or what are you thinking about when you talk in terms of affordability?
So I'm going to answer that more generally, and then I'll come back. Past couple months, this issue has come up most directly from from state regulators. I've spent a lot of time with state regulators the past few months, and it's been those interactions have been incredibly valuable. And the perspective I have is that their perspective is very important, because ultimately their ratepayers, the people they represent, pay for everything that we build. And what they have been communicating to the commission is, hey, we've had a dramatic increase in price the past few years, and especially in some of the regions where we've had markets, we've seen market outcomes that have high rate of increase. And so I would say I'm very concerned about that, but I'm also optimistic, because one of the things that is happening, at least in one region where we've seen that, is we have state regulators, consumer advocates, and generator owners all coming forward with agreement on certain reforms that I don't want to get into too much, because some of this is pending, but I see potential for some stakeholder agreement there in places where you kind of never see those groups agree. And so that is good. My general philosophy on reforms like that is that we've been up and down and left and right on reforms to some of these markets over the past decade or two. And when you meet with people who lend money to people who invest in these things, they sort of tell you things like, we discount that revenue stream to zero, and that is not good. And so I think there's pretty broad agreement that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. These reforms are directionally consistent with where we think we need to go to mitigate some of these risks. Let's all try and get together and figure out what we can do next that respect both of those things, the affordability need and the need to provide some stability. We'll see where we get. Again, just one vote here, but that's the sort of frame of reference that I approach that with. On the transmission side, I sort of look at this again. There's a delivered rate, and there's multiple components of that rate. There's the generation side, which we have been spending a lot of time on. There's also the transmission side, and those things kind of work together. And so I think we need to be looking across the board for efficiencies. I think I trust engineers, and I see reliability not just as lights on, lights off, but as health and safety, and as our sort of most sacred duty to people to make sure that they have power to heat and cool their homes when they need it. But we also need to look at what the engineers say and make sure that we're doing what's truly needed. That's sort of how I would approach that question.
Well, I think you just warmed the hearts of all the engineers sitting in the room by hearing that you trust them. You talked a little bit about some of the ongoing market reforms. I don't want to get into the specifics on that. There's been a lot of action going on over the last few years in the transmission space, rulemakings, workshops, technical conferences. A lot of that stuff's been going on. Now we're in compliance periods for different things that the Commission's been working on. And you've also mentioned the importance of certainty, regulatory certainty. I know that's a theme I keep hearing about a lot from the investment community, and for those people who are interested in making investments in long-term major capital investments and infrastructure development. So what do you think the Commission should be doing? What steps should they be taking to try to provide that level of certainty from a regulatory standpoint so that decisions can be made without feeling like the turf is shifting under you too frequently?
Yeah. Well, couple things. I mean, first, I think, again, I'm optimistic about having 5 commissioners who are working really well together right now. I think that's a really good starting point for having people who are open to finding consensus on issues. I will say the other thing that helps us is when stakeholders agree. And especially stakeholders like you all on things that are related to transmission. If you agree, and if you're working with other stakeholders outside this room, and you can bring that to the commission, that makes our job really easy. Still hard, but much easier. Maybe I'll say much easier. And so I would just say that on our rulemakings, I think, first of all, looking forward to compliance, I know this is a huge lift. My conversations with state regulators is like, they want a lot of information from you. And so when you get to the state engagement period, and when you're even talking about the work that you do on a daily basis just to maintain reliable service, I think engaging with the state regulators more and providing them with as much information as you can so that they understand what you're doing is really important, and would solve a lot of places where perhaps inadvertently wires get crossed. Ha ha ha.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think stakeholder engagement, coming to the commission with consensus, and then the other thing is, when there are 205s, I mean, we had a court case a couple years ago, this NRG case, where we don't have a lot of ability to steer in a 205, and I'm committed to following that decision in the statute. But you all probably know this, but these can be very hard choices, and they're even harder when people come to us with disagreements, and it's a yes/no, and it's almost always framed as an emergency. And so, it is what it is. The zone of just and reasonableness is a zone, and we have a standard that we apply to those filings, and we'll continue to do that. But again, I just want to encourage, the more you can agree on things before they come, the better it is. And I've had the pleasure of working on some filings recently where we had things that I think were controversial, that state regulators and utilities and other stakeholders all agreed on in a 205 context, and it made it much easier to get consensus within the commission and get it done.
So I think I've heard you mention consensus quite a few times there in that comment, and it extends even back to your background going to the Bipartisan Policy Center. And consensus has always been big at FERC. Even back when I was there, they love consensus.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What I wanted to ask you though is you did also mention your interaction with state commissions, and that's another area where sometimes it's pretty hard to achieve consensus, particularly given the federal-state jurisdictional divide. There's some natural tension there as well. What do you see as the biggest challenges in terms of FERC working with the states? How do you overcome those? What's your thinking in terms of the state-federal relationship on electric issues in particular?
So, I mean, first of all, I think the shared jurisdiction that's embodied in the statute that we work under is incredibly important, and I want to be really respectful of that and aware of it. The first thing that I did after hiring a few people and figuring out how to vote on a few orders was go to NARUC, Florida in July, perfect weather, but even better state regulator engagement there. And I just have to say, like, every time that I meet with state regulators, I come away understanding more and feeling like I can do this job better. And so I think, I just went to CREPC out west, and I met with a number of states there, and we talked 1920, and I think one of my takeaways is that everybody kind of understands there's a lot happening here. There's a lot of new demand. There's these huge challenges, but I think everybody comes into the conversation wanting to try and solve the issues. And so I would encourage you to continue to work with your states. A lot of the places where they are indicating, challenges or concerns, I think it can be solved with information. Not fully. I mean, there's still going to be places where you provide information and then they're going to want more. But providing that information more information as a starting point only helps, I think, because I think it will resolve and it will make clear what you're doing, what we're doing up front, and get them more bought in to working together. So I'm a huge, I won't say that I haven't been influenced by Commissioner Christie a little bit in this department. He and I went and visited the Virginia Commission and had lunch with them, and it was a really good meeting. But I've also been surprised about how useful these connections have been. I shouldn't have been, but I'm glad that I've done it, and I will continue to do it.
So you talked about the importance of planning for transmission, FERC's role in that. FERC obviously took a big step forward with Order 1920, but we're also continuing to hear a lot of focus on interregional transmission. What do you think, or what are the next steps for the Commission on looking at that issue?
Well, first of all, I think I see Daniel Paulkin in the back there who works for Chairman Manchin, and you definitely should ask him about this.
Nice try.
So that's my first answer.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, anything that Congress decides to act on and the President signs, I would be incredibly excited and motivated to implement fully and follow whatever statute they give us. At the same time, I think Jim Robb was with us at the Reliability Conference, and his sort of frame of reference on this really resonates with me, which is it kind of fits into this all of the above strategy on things. But Jim Robb is basically told us that, hey, interregional transmission can be a solution to some of the key emerging threats to reliability, and you need some generation that can run on those lines. And so I think interregional is really important. I also don't have any updates on Commission action on that, but I will leave it at, I think it's really important. I think we have a good record open already on this, and we have lots to think about. And at the same time, I'm really interested to see what Congress does.
Mm-hmm. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
All right. You talked about all of the above in your comments as well, and that's another question I wanted to ask. And after this, I'm going to open it up. So start thinking about what you want to ask the Commissioner about. But another area that you hear a lot of focus on, and we have it with discussions within our own group. We have a lot of associate members who are involved in the areas of, I call it advanced technologies. GETS is a category of that, but I think it's actually broader than that. What do you see as the role of those types of technologies in building out the grid? What's the Commission's thinking about what next steps might be in that direction?
Yeah, well, we have a next step open for comment right now.
Yeah.
File together and tell us what you think. I think, technologies that unlock efficiencies on the grid make a ton of sense to me. I mean, if we can do more with the system that we have, that's just common sense. We should be thinking about it, considering it, and doing it. I know that that's much easier said than done. I mentioned engineers earlier. This is one of those places where we have to be sure that these technologies actually work and can unlock those efficiencies at the time when the grid is stressed and when we need that energy to be deliverable. But from the case studies that I've heard, I think there are technologies out there that do this, and it's incredibly important to consider them. So I'm really excited about it. The rulemaking that we have open on this, I didn't vote on because it was my first meeting, but I'm really excited about it, and I'm looking to get a really good record. Hopefully, wires can come together and file a joint comment. If not, all of you individually, I know many of you will be there. It's really will be great to have you and your expertise to help guide us there.
Well, great. So the Commissioner has agreed to take questions from the audience. The good news is, with these lights, we really can't see any of you. So, we won't really know who's asking what question unless you want to identify yourself. I would encourage you to do that. But looks like Rob Gramlich got his hand up right up front and center.
Everyone's going to be surprised. Rob Gramlich has a question.
Actually, so I can see you, actually.
Hey, Rob.
Great to see you. Thanks for being here and being out and talking about your views on these. It's very helpful to the industry. And don't let me pin you down with this question, because I think we all appreciate the flexibility to build a consensus. Consensus builds stability and a stable environment for investment. But the question is, since you have such a unique window into consensus building around cost allocation and the benefits to be used for cost allocation, since you've been, working in your previous job on bipartisan consensus on that, and now, and you were doing related things at FERC. One thing is that's sort of new is resource adequacy is suddenly a real challenge on the generation side, as you said, from Jim Robb and NERC. And so the interaction between resource adequacy and benefits for transmission planning, I think, is becoming more and more important. And if regions can avoid very high capacity market prices or higher reserve margins than they might otherwise need, those can be real transmission related savings for consumers. So just if as high a level as you care to comment, how do you think about that in terms of the resource adequacy benefit to be incorporated in transmission planning?
So, again, just speaking for myself here, I think what is great about 1920 is there's a lot of flexibility on how states working with you all can craft their cost allocation strategy. And I think looking at benefits wherever they may be makes a ton of sense. And I think one of the goals of my work on a potential rehearing order would be to give states the tools that they need to see the value that the transmission is unlocking for them, and make sure that they have flexibility to adopt whatever benefit they think is needed so that they can agree with their states. And so what I would say to this group, again, is you all have a key role in helping your states understand what the benefits are of what you're doing. And you are the ones that can guide them towards, you are the ones that will ultimately guide them towards consensus. And so I really, I know that's just an incredibly important role, and it's going to take a lot of time, but my hope is that we can find ways to bolster that agreement with more information and the best information that you can provide them, and that we can come out of this exercise with people feeling really positive about building transmission to meet their needs.
Another question.
Commissioner Rosner, good to see you again.
You too.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments with respect to affordability and reliability. I think generally speaking, we often dichotomize the two, that pits them against each other, makes them sort of in opposition to one another. The question is, do you feel like they must be in opposition to one another? Could a reliable grid create more affordability in the future as a result of thwarting the likelihood of having an unreliable grid in the future?
Absolutely. I think an unreliable grid is like full stop unaffordable, because none of our economy works without access to electricity. And so, I'll just fall back on this general question, as a lot of the concerns that I've heard from states are informational in nature. And, I think a lot of this can be solved with more engagement and more information about what you're doing and why. Sure, there's still going to be some places where, they don't agree and they want you to do something different. But, I think in this country we've been incredibly lucky to have had a grid that was built the way it was, and that has served us so well for so long. And that wasn't an accident. And so, when I think about all the planning and all the work that FERC is asking you all to help people do going forward, the goal of that is to build a grid that serves needs. And so, affordability, reliability, they can be in tension, but ultimately, we have occasionally we'll have some hard choices on that, on what project, what size, what configuration makes the most sense for that moment. But also, I see just directional need that's very large.
Another question. We got some here in the front.
Thank you very much. So it's a plug for engineers right now. So as an engineer, the last couple of decades though, has been flat to declining load growth.
Yeah.
The paradigm that we have in front of us is increasing renewables with resource adequacy at the same time when the demand is increasing. So we've got both on the supply and the demand side. What would you say to how the voice of the engineer can be trusted more, given that we're in a planning paradigm that's different that we've had in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just incredibly optimistic that variable resources like renewables can be integrated successfully. Like, we know how to do it. Is it easy? No. Is it possible? Yes. And so the place that I spend the most time thinking about that at FERC has been on the market side, about providing the right incentives to build the right types of resources with the right attributes in places where they're needed. And I'll come back to ELCC again, just because we've spent a ton of time on this at the Commission, and I think probabilistic techniques like that are being used across the country. And the great thing about it is, if solar is not providing value to the grid on a particular feeder, or in a particular zone, or in a particular location, it will see a price signal to not invest there. The price should be matched to the value it provides, and I just think things like ELCC are really complicated. They need to be explained better, but also they're really smart. So thanks for the question.
Thanks again, Commissioner Rosner, for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. So just picking up on what you just said around incentives and the need to send the right incentives. I want to shift now on the transmission side to the FERC's transmission incentives policy, which has been in a lot of flux, arguably sending mixed signals, I think in our mind, to the industry. We saw, just as an example, the cybersecurity incentives policy, which kind of evolved and ended up in a place where no one, at least to my knowledge, no company has come forward and requested those incentives. Obviously a lot of back and forth on the R2 adder, another example. What are your views on the FERC's transmission rate incentives policy and how that should be designed and where the FERC may be heading on that in the future?
Thanks for the question. I thought we were saying softballs only. No, just kidding. So first I would say, and this is a very FERC answer, you could see some of my views on incentives through the orders that have been voted out over the past few months, and there's been a couple on incentives. The second thing I would say is, this is not a topic that I have had in front of me in a direct way, and so I think it would be something to be in touch on. You mentioned the cybersecurity incentive. That was something that Congress put into the statute. The Commission promulgated a rule maybe 2 years ago, and if no one's using it, I think it could be a really good time to have a conversation and assess, why or why not. That said, I also know that there's a lot of stakeholder fatigue. We've asked you all to do a lot, and there's a lot to do. Even putting the FERC work aside for a second, and so I think it's really important to me to hear from you all and other stakeholders about what the priorities are and where should we focus, because there's just so much to do. The Commission has issued a number of generic rulemakings, 2023, 1920, all of that's going to require a lot of work to get compliance done. And so this is a long way of saying there are scarce resources, and I'm curious to hear from you all about where it makes most sense to deploy next.
Other questions? We have a couple over here.
All right. Again, thank you for being with us. Mike Batta, Dominion. You mentioned earlier that you like to geek out on markets and market mechanisms. I can relate to that. And you mentioned that their role, of course, is to bring value to the consumer. Can you tell us your view, your thoughts on the role and the effectiveness, being measured by value, I guess, of market mechanisms in energy and capacity versus transmission, which you have a more physically natural monopoly?
I mean, I think taking a step back on that, I mean, I think you kind of want to look at both, and you want to choose the most efficient option. And I think transmission can add a lot of option value. I mean, I think Rob was hinting at this with his question, which is, you know, if we're thinking resource adequacy and transmission enables you to obtain that from a remote resource, you know, we should look at that. Not all of our, I would say that there's not total consistency about how that happens across the country, but I'm optimistic that things like Order 1920 sort of ask that question and gives states and utilities sort of the tools that they need to do to take a look at that.
I think we had one other question here in the front.
Yeah, I'll continue down the line here. Hey, Commissioner.
Hey, Patrick.
We've been talking about reliability, cost. I think some of this gets back, and I've heard you mention this, timeliness of decisions at the Commission.
Mm-hmm.
Just curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on, like, that impacts, you know, investments and everything else in terms of signals, like how maybe you hope to tackle that? Is that just back to the word consensus?
No, I love this question. So after I got nominated, I went and met with a bunch of the former commissioners, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but one of the people I met with was Commissioner Spitzer, and he gave me great advice and had great stories. And also one of the things I was like, you know, so what's your advice? And he's like, read the papers, make a decision. I don't care how you decide. I mean, I do, but like just decide. And so that really resonated with me, and you know, I don't have control over what we vote on, but if you have things that are, anyone in this room, if you have things that like, you're like, it's an emergency and you really need to move on this, let me know, and I can do, I can definitely flag things. But you know, I'm there to work through the hard questions, and you know, I think we just did an ROE order the other day that might be a few years late, but we did it, and you know, and these are really hard things, but I think, you know, we have to try and we have to make a decision, and I know you all will be there if we don't, and I'm also hoping that moving forward that you'll be there with consensus to help us get it right the first time, so yeah, so you know, I know a lot of these things like don't have the statutory clock of a 2:05, but you know, but I'm totally committed to working through them and interested in doing that. So if there's something out there that hasn't been acted on that you all think is particularly important, please, you know, bring it to my attention.
Well, I know one of the conditions of your agreeing to be here was that we wrap this up in time for you to get all of your other work done and get home in time for trick-or-treaters this evening. So I want to be sensitive to your time. Commissioner, I want to thank you for being here with us. Yeah. I don't know if you want to acknowledge, I know you have some of your advisors or staff here.
Yeah.
It might be helpful to have them stand up so people are familiar
Robert,
with them
Alex.
as well.
They're there. So that's Robert Ferris, and in the back is Alex de Taboada. So Robert is covering markets east, and Alex in the back is doing reliability.
Great. Well, thank you again for being here. Thank you, thank your staff
Yeah.
for coming here as well.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time.
This was really fun. I enjoyed talking with you all. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Yeah.
So we're going to bring the first panel up so we can go ahead and get that started.